Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Jennifer Gardella, and I am a survivor of vicious domestic violence at the hands of a sadistic abuser. We met online and met for our first date. So he wasn't looking to move in right away. In fact, he was even a little bit like, I need to figure this out with you. And so there was not a rush. And I was fine with that. I have had 3 children. He had 2. If it's not going to work out, you don't want to introduce the kids. But what there was in the beginning of the relationship was something called love bombing right away. There was a rush on his part to consume my weekends. If he didn't have plans, I was to be with him. I thought he just really liked me. But the truth is that he was pulling me into his world to isolate me. And besides that, there were very few indications until I moved into his house that there would be any problems. But as I moved in, it instantaneously, everything became a problem and everything was a struggle. So there was all of a sudden comments about the way I had raised my children, the way that my children act. He didn't like my friends all of a sudden that he had sort of liked before. I didn't have enough money, and suddenly he decided to start jabbing into these very painful and vulnerable points in my life. And I remember, we had moved in, I'd rented out my house, and I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? None of these comments were there before I moved in. And it got worse and worse and worse. And I liken it to a graph where you have your highs of love bombing and then you have the abuse that is dripped in. And the gaslighting would start, and we'd hit a low because he would start calling me crazy and that didn't happen and all of those pieces. But then he'd bring me back up with a little bit of love bombing. He knew he had to keep me on the hook. And this process is called a trauma bond. He was trauma bonding me to him. It's very typical. It is psychological abuse. And I fell for it completely. And so I thought that I had to make him happy. I thought I had to heal his heart, not realizing that he wasn't healing his heart. That was on me. I had to start to prove to him that I was worthy of his love and I was the real deal as a partner. And it just got uglier and uglier. Body shaming started almost instantaneously, which was horrendous to try to live through. Suddenly I wasn't working out enough. I wasn't thin enough. Why are you here? I don't want this. And I was like, why am I here then? Right? It was kind of like you invited me to move over. And so that got very, very difficult to navigate. There was extreme financial abuse, where I either was screamed at because I wasn't paying enough of the bills, even though I was paying 50% of them. I was screamed at after paying for the family vacations because I hadn't paid for them, even though I did. So there was severe financial abuse. There was isolation from everybody, including my clients. There was constant interrupting. I could not concentrate when he was in the house. I could not think straight. When I finally went out and got an office out of the house, I was screamed at for wasting money. It was almost like it was a lose-lose situation. So anything that I tried to do to make the relationship better, anytime that he would say I was doing something wrong, I would correct it. And he was just always right there with you didn't correct it the right way, and or you also do this incorrectly. It was intolerable to live with. So things got gradually worse over the course of a couple years. And it was at the point where you always know that there's a problem when you start Googling behavior. So we are now sitting at about December of 2019, and I'm on the internet searching for, why does he scream at me all the time? Also, what started to pop up from Google was, he's a narcissist, he's an abuser, this is, here are all the signs. And I started to really step back and say, wow, Christmas of 2019 was the stuff of like a Game of Thrones battle. Honestly, he was just mad at the world, screaming constantly. It was horrendous to live through. And a couple months after that, COVID hit. And suddenly we were all home together. My first husband had passed away. My 2 college-age children were home with us. His were intermittently home. And suddenly we were all together all the time. And as many couples experienced, abuse gets turned up. And my children and I, and actually my abuser, agreed at that point that we should spend some time away. We looked at renting, maybe a hotel room for a couple weeks or a local apartment for 3 months. And it turns out that one of my kids who went to college, who was in college at the time, her apartment back at college was empty. We decided to drive out there. So this is now April of 2020. And on our way out there, my 2 adult daughters looked at me and said, "Mom, we're being abused. He's abusing you. This is domestic violence, and it's time to leave. We don't want to go back there." So when I was pulling out of his driveway that day, I didn't realize that I was escaping domestic violence, but I was officially escaping domestic violence. From there, we spent a month in Pittsburgh in the apartment, so Wi-Fi could be clicked on easily. Some of the girls had left beds, all the kitchen stuff was in place. It was really interesting how that situation was set up so nicely for us. I did inform him while we were living out there that we would be moving into a new living situation once we came back. And I set up a new home for us in town. And once I moved in, the horrors of post-separation abuse started. So this looks like 50 calls a day, endless text messages and emails. Legal abuse started, meaning, he was using every method available to just run up legal bills. He was trying to bleed me dry. It was absolutely a brutal process. Banging on the door at 7 a.m., stalking my children at work. We were in the throes of utter chaos. And you sit there and you say, wait a minute, what's going on? All I did was leave. He didn't have the right to be doing this to me. Since then, there have been 105 instances of stalking and harassment. I'm only 3 months since the last incident. So the abuse is still ongoing. He's still trying to track me down. He's still trying to talk to me. He's still trying to involve me in his life. It is never ending. So I will say that probably the best part of my journey was that first summer that we were out in April, May, June, July of 2020. I made contact with my local domestic violence center. I was hysterically crying, scared out of my mind. And the woman on the other end of the phone said to me, we're going to get you the legal help you need, but do you need to talk to someone? Would you like to talk to a counselor? I can set you up with an intro call, an intake call for counseling. And I said, I don't need counseling at a domestic violence center. I wasn't hit. And she said, we don't know who she was. They've looked in the books. We can't find her name. I thank her every day. But what happened next was she said to me, that doesn't really matter if you were hit or not. There's other forms of abuse. And since you are calling a domestic violence center looking for a restraining order, it could help to just try one call. Needless to say, I learned all of the different forms of abuse that I had lived with. I went through 8 weeks of crisis counseling. I did about 20 sessions of talk therapy. I did 10 sessions of what's called EMDR, which is a specialized kind of therapy for survivors of trauma. I did 2 full 10-week educational programs through the center, and I logged into endless support groups. So I started my healing journey in the throes of abuse. I was still being viciously abused. He would follow me to the gym and stand behind me on the elliptical trainer. And I'm happy to say that not only did I heal, which I believe your healing journey is always a process and maybe never ending, but I also just went through the 45-hour training through the Pennsylvania Department of Domestic Violence Awareness. And I am now certified to work with clients. So I am teaching one of those educational programs that I was part of. I'm actually one of the leaders in it now, and I'm working on the hotline. So the very hotline that saved me, that brought me into the Center for Services, that's the very work that I've been doing as well. For all survivors, you have to burn down who you were. You have to burn down this woman who was unfortunately not strong enough to withstand the abuse and say no more. We accept things. We have no boundaries. And so all of that in me had to go away for me to rebuild my life. Now I'm able to look at women and say, your path will be your own. Your story is going to be your own. I can't tell you what steps to take next, but let me tell you what I did so that it can inform your journey a little bit and provide some hope, right? I just got remarried. We're buying a house. There's a lot of good things happening to me, but it's because I did the work when I needed to do the work. So when we talk about love bombing, we talk about atypical events that either happen too soon or are just too grandiose in nature. So this looks like, you meet somebody, like I had met him, and all of a sudden 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, he's inviting me away. And I was like, are we ready for this? And, throughout the whole thing, he was paying for it. I said, oh, I love to golf. We were going golfing. Everything was like a little too perfect. And I remember that very clearly. And then I also remember the first time he came after me in a really nasty way. We were on a road trip going to Florida. We loved to road trip together. And all of a sudden, he was screaming at me that I had to find a hotel so that we could stop for the night. And I'm working on, several websites to try to find the hotel, make phone calls. Like, how do you find that? And it all of a sudden started to drip into, well, if you can't do this, maybe you're not the right one to keep up with me. That made me work harder to try to show him that I was the right girl, rather than say, wow, this guy is out of his mind. I remember the first time that he started to body shame me. It was all of a sudden, why aren't you 115 pounds? And I was like, I never really wanted to be 115 pounds. I would look like a skeleton at 115 pounds. And then it turned into, I want you to have long blonde hair, and you can see I'm a brunette, right? So that was always very difficult. Nothing about me was ever good enough, and always had to change in some way for him. And I thought he was trying to make me a better person. He was just always trying to keep me on edge. So I remember he would go away on business trips and come back, and during his time away, I would clean the entire house. There would be dust spots. He would find a dust spot like behind the toaster oven, and suddenly it was a 4-alarm fire, and I had to redo the whole thing at 10 o'clock at night. Maybe I had not done, the entire sink in one of the bathrooms because I ran out of time. Now, keep in mind, I probably also had our children involved and had been managing their schedules for the week. I had the dog, I had a business, I had a teaching career. So there was a lot going on, and I wanted him to come home to a clean house, and he didn't really appreciate that. And what I learned from abusers is that they never appreciate it. I had learned a wealth of information that kind of hit me sideways, right? I had never heard about, all of the power and control wheel that is so widely used when explaining domestic violence. And I learned all this information. And so this is the fall of 2022. And I decided on October 1st, which is the beginning of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, that I would share a post every single day on social media highlighting something that I had learned about the abuse that I had gone through. And it was a way for me to kind of give back and educate people. And my hope was to help one person. If I made one little difference with one person, I was like, I got this. And immediately the comments, the emails, the text messages that came through, private messages, it was unbelievable, of people that said any of the following. I had guys writing in, please remember that this also impacts men, which was fascinating to me. And at the end of the month, it had become like a full-time job managing all this. And at the end of that, a good friend of mine, Mary Fran Bontempo, said, you've got a book here. Like, look at this wealth of information that you've just shared with people. So that was the fall of 2022, and I kind of sat on it. It's a really hard journey to go down to share your story, and especially when you first start sharing it. And so it published at the end of September for October 1st, the beginning of Domestic Violence Month 2023. And it was one of the pinnacle moments of 2023 for me. I couldn't believe, like, you birth a book, even if you self-publish, which is so exciting in and of itself. And at the end of the day, I said, wow, I can really help a lot of people with this. The book is called Listen for the Whispers of Abuse. And it's the whole idea that even if you don't think you were hit, there was probably physical altercation. I did have some that my therapist dug around and found. And then I had even buried some memories of being actually hit in the relationship, which was brutal to go through. The first thing that I noticed, or that came up immediately, was there was a lot of pushing and shoving, right? If I was in the way, I was shoved out of the way. So if I was doing the dishes in the kitchen and he needed to get to the garbage can underneath, I was given about 1.5 seconds of warning, and he was like, move, you're in my way, and would push me out of the way. He did it to everybody, right? It wasn't just directed at me. But what we have to realize and normalize is the conversation around that's physical abuse. Normal people don't get pushed and shoved, right? Victims get pushed and shoved around. The other thing he'd like to do was take boxes and throw them at my head for the recycling bin. And he would do this and love to hit me, and he would laugh. Again, physical abuse. And probably the worst of it is we would go to play tennis. I love to play tennis, but I'm not very good. He was a good tennis player, and he would take me over to give me what he called lessons. And there were several times when I wasn't hitting well enough, and I would get verbally berated, or he would wail a tennis ball directly at my chest. And I would like to the point where I had bruising. And he would say these famous words: if you were hitting better, I wouldn't get so angry and do that. And I remember thinking to myself, I really wasn't hitting the tennis ball well. It doesn't matter. I didn't deserve to be physically harmed because I'm a bad tennis player. Self-proclaimed bad tennis player. We all have our off days, and I certainly had many of them out on the court. And so what's so fascinating is that through my escape, through all of that journey, those memories didn't, I'm going to say, dislodge from my, I had really buried them in my unconscious. They didn't dislodge for over a year. And it wasn't until I was on vacation driving past an outdoor tennis court that I remember stopping on my bicycle, looking at the tennis court and saying, oh my gosh, I was hit. It was a monumental moment in my healing journey. Because first of all, I was like, wow, I cannot believe that I accepted it and buried it. But I saw the trauma bond. I saw how he had convinced me that the abuse was my fault. And then I thought to myself, oh my gosh, what's under there? What else have I buried? We did some work in that area, but I got back on my bike. I'm on vacation. I pass the tennis court. I get back on my bike, run to the beach. My friends who I was vacationing with, one of my best friends was sitting there. And I said, you're not going to believe this. Guess what I just remembered? And she looked at me and she said, I was afraid this would come up. I was pretty sure that he had hit you at some point. So it was not stereotypical, right? He didn't smack me across the face or whack me with a broken bottle of Jack Daniels or kick me, but it was vicious physical abuse. But beyond that, when you think that you're hearing abuse, if your friend is being humiliated by her partner at dinner, if he has a god-awful pet name for her, if he's yelling at her all the time and she comes crying to you, and this could be a loved one, a colleague, a friend, listen to what she is saying, because what she is telling you is like the tip of the iceberg in what she's experiencing at home, probably on a regular basis. The worst thing that you can say to a survivor is, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're out. He was such a jerk. Why did you stay? We get it. You're on our team when you say things like that. But what we really need you to do is say things like, tell me more. If they're still living in the abuse, I'm here for you. I'm hearing things that are concerning to me. Let's keep talking. I want to hear more. So now I talk to people all the time when I speak in public about this, and I say, direct her to her local domestic violence center. The 1-800 domestic violence line has a page on their website that you can click on your state, find your county, your local domestic violence center. And not only can victims and survivors call for support, but support people can call for help. Yeah, I would say that for all people. And I'm going to use the expression normalize the conversation again. Talk to your children, your nieces, your nephews, your neighbors, your girlfriends, anybody who's susceptible, right? As we raise our kids, as we raise children in general, it should be part of the curriculum. What does a healthy relationship look like? But also, let's not sugarcoat it, because let's also talk about those red flags. Let's teach our kids about love bombing. Let's teach our kids that, you shouldn't scream at anybody, and no one should. If someone is screaming at you, walk away. If a guy looks at you and says, ugh, you're wearing that? That is a big red flag. He's trying to control what you're wearing. He's putting you down. That's a very simplistic example, but that one comment can snowball. And so that's the number one piece of advice that I have. And the second one would be to all of the support people out there, educate everybody, whether you see this in your life or not. I mean, approximately, I would say 35 to 50% of people have experienced this form of abuse in one way or the other. But everyone needs to do a better job educating themselves and those around them in what to look out for with abuse in abusive situations. And that in turn will help the victims. So another important thing that every survivor and victim needs to realize is that there is tremendous hope for her or him on the other side. If you do the work, I don't know what your path is going to look like. No one knows what your path is going to look like. But rest assured, if you believe that the abuse is not your fault, and then you start to put in take small steps for yourself on how to improve your life, there's a lot of good things happening to me, but it's because I did the work when I needed to do the work.